Hello and welcome to the Bloody Scotland Book Club, Take 2, the second of our book clubs. Before I introduce you to everybody that's read the book and is going to have a chat, I'll just tell you how this evening is going to work. We are going to go through each book individually and we'll give you a chance to actually ask some questions. If you put them onto Facebook, we'll be able to ask the panel questions about each of the individual books. Before you see each book, what we're also going to do is we've got a short video by each of the authors to just read a little bit of the book to give you some idea behind what the book's about. And at the very end of this, we're also going to bring on next month's chair, which is Lynn Anderson, and Lynn will tell you what books we're prepared to do next month, so you can set up for that. But let me do some introductions. My name's Gordon Brown, or as I'm now Morgan Cry. I've got an expat alias because my book 31 Bones is out at the moment and it's set amongst the expats in Spain. Frankie is a host, chairperson, organiser of book launches, publishing, events, tours and clubs. She's not paying me to say this, by the way. And sometimes comedy, music, theatre and art, an ex-bookseller with a pipe dream of travelling bookshop, taking mostly crime books, authors and events to places that others don't reach. Hi, Frankie.
Hello.
Jonathan Whitelaw is an author, award-winning journalist, again he paid me to say that, and broadcaster. When he's not writing about the devil solving crimes, he gets cosy with his Parker sister mysteries, and has just signed a new book deal with Red Dog Press. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Oh, spot on, and the fiver is in the post.
Louise Fairbarn is a freelance production journalist and proofreader and was the crime fiction reviewer for the Scotsman in Scotland on Sunday newspapers for several years. She's currently a judge for the 2021 Niall Marsh Award for the best first novel, part of New Zealand's premier crime mystery novel prizes. She blogs about crime fiction as the girl with all the crime books, as you can see behind, I think. Find her at www.crimebookgirl.com. Welcome to everybody. And how is everybody tonight?
Very well. Very well. Glad to be here. A privilege to be here. Delighted to be here and glad to be talking about books on a Wednesday night. I had to stop and remember there what day of the week it was.
That's the COVID thing. What year is it? Right, so what we're going to do is we've got 3 books to do tonight. We've got, first of all, we'll do Lou Berney's November Road. That will be followed by Marion Todd's What They Knew. And then we'll finish with Val McDermid's The Distant Echo. So to kick off for Lou Berney in November Road, we have got a little video. I think there was a couple of little technical glitches on it, but all the way from America, we have Mr. Berney, just to give you a bit of outline to November Road.
Hello, Scotland. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to read a couple of pages from my novel November Road, which is set in 1963. And the main character in the section is a man named Frank Guidry, who works for the New Orleans Mafia. And this is the part of the novel where everything gets started for him. Guidry shaved, trimmed his nails, browsed the closet. He picked a brown window-pane suit with slim notched lapels and a continental cut. Cream-colored shirt, green tie. Green tie? No. Thanksgiving was less than a week away, and he wanted to get into the spirit of the season. He swapped the green tie for one the deep, dusty orange of an autumn sunset. When he stepped into the living room, he saw that the brunette was still there. She was curled up on the sofa, not even dressed yet, watching the television. Guidry went over to the window and found her skirt and her blouse on the floor where they'd fallen the night before, her bra hanging on the bar cart. He tossed the clothes at her. "Beat it," he said. "1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, I'll give you till 5. "He's gone," she said. She didn't even look at Guidry. "I can't believe it." Guidry realized that she was crying. "Who's gone?" he said. "They shot him," she said. "Shot who?" He looked over at the TV. On the screen, a newscaster sat behind a desk, taking a deep drag off his cigarette. He looked limp and dazed, as if someone had dumped a bucket of cold water on him. The motorcade had just passed the Texas School Book Depository in downtown Dallas, the newscaster said. Senator Ralph Yarborough told our reporter that he was riding 3 cars behind the president's car when he heard the 3 distinct rifle shots. The president of what? That was Guidry's first thought. The president of some oil company? Of some jungle republic that no one had ever heard of? Guidry didn't understand why the brunette was so broken up about it.
Very good. And we have Mr. Berney. So just to give you a bit of idea, November Road set against the backdrop of the assassination of JFK. It's a poignant, evocative crime thriller that centres on a desperate cat and mouse chase across 60s America, a story of unexpected connections, daring possibilities, and the hope of second chances. And I didn't make that up. That's what it says on the back of the book. So we'll start just generally. What did everybody think? So we'll start with Louise. What did you think of the book?
I'm going to start by saying this is the second time I've read this. Everybody was raving about it last year, so I thought, oh, fine, I'll pick it up, I'll read it. I was completely not blown away. Reading it again, I can appreciate more about why people love it, but I'm pretty ambivalent about it, to be honest. It's beautifully written. The settings, I particularly like the parts when they're in Vegas and the evocation of New Orleans. The characters are great. There's just something about it that doesn't work for me. And looking at it again, I think it's because there's kind of three main protagonists whose stories kind of all mesh together. And I feel like they're three different books. And I can't get past that. It's just me. It's beautifully written. It's all the rest of it, but I just can't get past the fact that it doesn't hang together. Sorry.
No, that's right. Jonathan, what do you think? What was your view?
Well, do you know, I'm hoping that someone's going to completely rave about it. I'm not going to be the one that's going to completely rave about it. I'm sort of positioning myself here as being the lukewarm water. If anybody out there gets that Spinal Tap reference, then you get extra credit. I agree. I feel that there's a lot going on in this book. The kind of set to the backdrop of the JFK assassination. That's a big meal to swallow at the best of times before we start factoring in everything else in the characterization. I loved how it was written. I loved it. Very, very polished style. I wasn't wholly familiar with it. In the sense that I hadn't read it before. Obviously, this was the first time that I'd read it for the purposes of the book club this month. As the eternal contrarian, anything that people rave about, I tend to be put off a little bit. And when you've got Exceptional by Stephen King on the front cover, that's not gonna sell it for me, unfortunately. But when I started reading the first chapter in particular, I keep coming back. I've got in my notes, I keep coming back to the first chapter. It's quite graphic. It's quite a graphic introduction. It doesn't really pull any punches, particularly when Guidry takes the woman back to his apartment and things like that. A different woman, I should point out, to the one that's just been read so beautifully by the author. And I thought, oh, right, okay, felt a wee bit needless, felt a wee bit kind of gratuitous. Maybe I'm just a prude, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what everybody else thinks. But I kind of warmed to it. I did warm to it, and actually, funnily enough, the kind of passages that Lou Berney there, obviously describing the moment, the assassination, that evokes so many memories for so many people all around the world. I thought that particular section was probably my favourite actually out of the whole thing. I thought he perfectly captured that kind of 60s almost sensibility. The tie, mentioning the tie, changing it from the emerald green to the autumn orange. I could picture it, and that sort of appeals to me as a reader. That said, there is a lot going on with it. It was raved about. It continues to be raved about with good reason, I suppose. Lukewarm water, I think, is that was a very, very roundabout way of saying that I'm sat firmly on the fence, wasn't it? I should have just said that.
Okay, Frankie, are we 3 out of 3 here?
Well, nearly. I'm sitting slightly further up the fence, I think. I thought I have to first of all say it was really lovely just hearing the author speak. It kind of, one, it helps you pronounce the names. And which is crucial, and two, just that actually was really, that was kind of fascinating now thinking back about what I think about it. So I think it's a really fascinating book that looks at and actually this links with another book that we've read for this month, but that looks at friendship, that looks at relationships. And I agree slightly with Louise, this could have been 3 books very easily. The characters are incredibly well drawn. And the relationships between some of the characters are fascinating. I'm trying really hard not to say some things because I don't want to spoil, but within, if you were to take the sort of the three sort of plots almost that are running through it, there's a what I would consider the middle plot, and there's an unlikely relationship between one of the main characters and somebody who sort of becomes their sidekick for a while. And I think it's a very touching relationship, and it's a kind of surprising relationship. And if you are somebody who is interested in characterization and interested in how to mesh those sorts of relationships together, then this is definitely a book for you. The JFK angle, it kind of gave it something to hook on. But I don't think I personally needed it. I think for me, there's the road trip, and that's what this was kind of about.
Yeah, I think I'm not the same as the 3 of you, in that I get recommended it by Lynn Anderson, I think it was, and I read it all in one day, right? And I loved it. I think partly because I'm always fascinated with books that are set of a time. When Stephen King wrote his book about the assassination of President Kennedy and going back in time, I always love to see what would it really have been like living there. What does it smell like? How do you walk? How do you talk? What goes on? And what I thought was interesting about Guidry at the beginning was, I do think it needed the beginning because he kind of had to be bad to start with because of the journey. And that for me was interesting. But what you said, Frankie, was for me was one of the things. All of the relationships are unexpected, I think. I think that's maybe where, I don't know, you can tell me from that point of view, but I think maybe that makes it feel like there's 3 different things going on. But I kind of liked that. I don't know if you did. I kind of liked the fact that the relationships kept sparking up, and I thought, that's just not what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, I think, yes, that was kind of what kept me going. I think a little bit. There were some bits when I was reading it where I kind of stuttered and thought, this isn't what I would normally read. Doesn't stop it from being a good read. And it was the relationships that kept me going, I think. And I didn't know I was such a kind of relationship orientated reader. That was a bit of a surprise. I thought I was, I'm straight down the line. I'll hold my hands up to it. Give me a police procedural and I'm there. But actually, there were so many lovely little kind of vignettes. And I think that's what kept me going. I think it's a great book, I have to say. I think it's really beautifully written. I think there's an awful lot that people can find in it, even if it's not the sort of book that they would normally pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Louise, you were going to say something there?
I was going to say the thing that I tripped over most was, so we have Frank, who is manipulative and ruthless, and there's that great line at the beginning which I had to write down. Weights and measures, he says at one point, and that's it. That is him completely at the beginning. By the end, it's very different. He has gone on a journey, for want of a better phrase, but that ending it's odd as well. I mean, it's kind of almost elegiac, and you look at the beginning, you look at the ending and go, I'm not entirely sure that that's where you get if you started there, but it works. But I trip over the fact I trip over his relationship with Charlotte, not because it's badly done. I think it's beautifully drawn, but she's on a different journey entirely. And her realization is basically that she can do things. The introduction to her is lovely. It's everything that you would think of about a 60s woman in a small town. She is belittled by her husband. She's patronized by her boss. She is treated with disdain by this assistant bank manager who she remembers being a useless pain in the neck from school. And then by the end of the book, she is somebody very different. But I sort of see that journey. I don't know, that one to me makes more sense. It's just that when you put it together, that it kind of I didn't know that they belonged together in the same book.
It's interesting because I've got one of the comments from Facebook from Pat Hallam was the same thing about Charlotte, captured the pre-feminist era when the women like her were discovering Betty Friedan and just starting to question it. I thought that's why they kind of needed each other, because they kind of bounced off each other to get there in a way that neither of them, I think, would ever have done so. I don't either. That's the, and maybe it's that kind of odd combinations that put it together. Because one of the things I found quite interesting was, although Guidry is the central character, the baddie, or not the baddie, it's difficult to tell who's the baddie sometimes in this. It is, but the Baron character, I loved him. I love the way he talks. I love it's that laconic, laissez-faire. This is just what I do. I know it's violent, don't really care. For me, that was one of the beauties of the book, was you could pull people out who had very distinct. You could tell who they were. Yeah. They weren't like 17 people who were mashed in and you forgot who won. You couldn't forget who they were. Jonathan?
That's very true.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the kind of Baron character, I kept on picturing Javier Bardem from No Country for Old Men. You know, it's that sort of relentless. He does the job. He doesn't really care what the job is. That's it. That's his gig. Picking up on something that you talked about, Gordon, just in terms of that, kind of trying to create the flavour of the era. I mean, that everybody always says, oh, the city plays a part as a character, or the setting plays a part of the character in books. We say that all the time. We talk about it constantly. And the era for me really, really does play a part in this. I mean, I kind of touched it earlier on, just that sort of the image of Guidry. Guidry. Did we decide? Did anybody listen to the audio version?
Guidry, I think.
Say it properly. That image of him, I could see him in the kind of very much the madmen, the suit, the slick back hair. Again, reminded me a little of, if you guys remember, saw the film Green Book with Viggo Mortensen.
Yep.
You know, that's set around about, I think, is that maybe the late 60s, I think.
Yeah, because they reference the Green Book at one point.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Lou Berney, very much, it's a testament to his writing ability. Obviously, is that he was able to completely suck me through that time warp and take me back to that place. And again, that I also agree with Frankie in the sense that did we need the assassination, the JFK assassination element of it? Would they have almost been able to set the whole thing without having that as the peg to hang on? Probably, but you're immediately sucked in 2-3 chapters into exactly where you are. You're in November 1963, and there's no getting around it. But like I said, very, very polished. A very, very kind of polished writing style that and again to echo Frankie, hearing the author read it himself, it sounds even more polished when he reads it, as opposed to the voice in my head.
That's quite interesting. Frankie, something for you. Well, it's not just for everybody, but one of the things is I asked each of the authors for a little bit of insight. So what I said to them before we did this, Lou and Val and Marion said, could you give me a bit of insight? And I got a lot. Like, I know how they wrote everything. I don't really, but some of it is brilliant stuff. The interesting bit from Lou, I picked a lot, but Lou said something which was interesting, is originally this book was going to be set in one town. It wasn't going to be a road trip book, yeah? And he said, but it morphed. And the question for me is, does it benefit from that, or does it feel like it was a town book that's become a road book?
No, I think, well, I can't imagine this as a town book.
Yeah.
I think it would take us perhaps to the books that we're going to talk about later, small town, and all the things that come with that. I think the fact that this was kind of so American. It was road trip. It was American dream. It was, there were so many things going on there. And I don't think that would have been as easy to do in one small place, even at a big place like New Orleans. I think, I think stopping at all the little towns, I think that was really important. I think the road trip was really fundamental to it. And I think it's what kept the pace going, because there always had to be a move forward, a physical move forward, let alone the mental one. I have to say, I wish, I kind of feel like there are more stories from those characters.
Yeah, no, I agree. It feels like
I'd quite like to know a bit more about some of them.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I got a question from Jackie Graham. She said something which occurred to me when I was reading it was, would there have been such a compelling reason for someone like Guidry to do what he did if it hadn't been such a big, high-profile thing he was involved in? In other words, the driver to get him and the driver for him to move is so big that he can't stop. You know, that it's just, it's not possible. Do you not think that's why it needed to be something like that at the beginning?
I think it made it easier to pin it onto the JFK assassination. You could make it, I don't know, you could make it a state governor, make a name up, whatever, but it wouldn't have the same sense of jeopardy, and it wouldn't, as Jonathan said, drag you in exactly to that point in time in the same way at all. Yeah.
I think it's really...
Carry on.
In one respect, the assassination's kind of a MacGuffin. It's the thing that is there to start things off.
Yeah.
And it kind of doesn't come back in because you get sucked into this is the jeopardy that Frankie is now in, with Berney on his tail, which I have to say is almost like comic relief in places.
Yes.
The thing where he gets injured, it's slapstick. And it's hilarious, but you wouldn't have all of that if it wasn't such a high-profile person at the beginning. It just wouldn't have the same sense of jeopardy. Therefore, you wouldn't have the same sense of urgency of getting away, which it's all about in the end.
I also don't think it does any harm when it comes to sales and profile when you've got something as massive as the JFK assassination tied to it. You know, was it Robert Grisham? I think it was Robert Grisham famously said that, you know, as long as you put a swastika on the front of the book, it's going to sell because it's got that Nazi World War II element to it. Yeah. And this is almost exactly the same. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising it. That's not a jaded, pessimistic dig. Far from it. But yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree with the MacGuffin element of it. It certainly is, and you know, it's the classic, isn't it? You know, everybody knows where they were when JFK was assassinated. I
know where I was. I was in my pram.
I'm not going to tell you where I was. I wasn't a glint in my mother's eye yet.
Well, I think it's really interesting that has worked for everybody but me, and I think maybe I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, and I get quite irritated by that. So I think that was my problem was that here we are putting something out there that, you know, there will be people who think could be true.
Yep.
It's kind of more sane than all of the conspiracy theories, to be fair. You know, it's a case of, yes, he was shot by a guy with a sniper rifle, and then it's just quietly tidied away afterwards. Yeah, if you like.
Thank God.
You know, but it's kind of more sane than some of the other. I just look at conspiracy theories and go, why? Can't you know?
Yeah, they're always worth reading. But
yes.
So that's Lou Berney's November Road. So we've been reading that as the first book. So we need to move on. So the next book we're going to look at is Marion Todd's What They Knew. And before we read that, what we're going to do is hear Marion read a little bit from it.
Hello, I'm Marion Todd, author of the DI Claire Mackay crime series. And today I'd like to read you a short extract from the beginning of the fourth in the series, What They Knew. A copy of the cover there. The book opens with a character called Alison, who is sitting watching the Hootenanny on Hogmanay. She's on her own, but she's expecting a guest. The Hootenanny audience were counting down as Alison moved into the hall. She crept up to the door and put her eye to the spyglass that gave her a wide-angled view of the doorstep and beyond. It was dark, of course, only a few streetlights casting a dull glow on the houses opposite. But her outside light shone down on the person who stood on the threshold. She scrutinised the face for something familiar. She was faintly nervous, but not sure why. "Happy New Year," Jules announced, and the sound of a pipe band playing Auld Lang Syne drifted into the hall. A new year. She took her courage in both hands and opened the door. A smile spread across the visitor's face. "Alison, so sorry I'm late. Forgive me." Alison stood for a moment, hesitant. Then she returned the smile. "Of course," she said. Then she stepped back to admit her guest. The visitor held out a bottle of red wine. "Let's toast the new year. I hope red's okay. It's a good one." In the kitchen, Alison switched on the oven to preheat, uncorked the wine, and took glasses out of the cupboard, while her visitor waited on the living room sofa. "Can't beat the Hootenanny," the visitor said, as Alison appeared with 2 glasses of wine. She set these down on the coffee table. "I've put some food in to heat. Just veggie sausage rolls, but they're pretty good, quite like the real thing." "Sounds great." She chose a seat opposite her visitor and made to raise her glass. The visitor took the other glass, then said, "Sorry, I hope this doesn't sound cheeky, but I don't suppose you've got any food we can have now? Crisps or nuts? I missed dinner and I'm starving." "I'm sure I have something," Alison said. She rose from her seat and went back into the kitchen. As soon as she was out of sight, the visitor slipped a small tablet silently into Alison's glass, swirling it around to help it dissolve. Alison returned, bearing a bowl of pistachios and another of Bombay mix. "Is this okay? The hot food shouldn't be too long." "Perfect." The visitor picked up the other glass. "Cheers. Here's to us." On the TV, Jules was chatting to some celebrity. "Who is that?" the visitor asked, but Alison shook her head. "Soap star, I think. Not sure, really." The visitor indicated Alison's glass. "Drink up. It's bad luck if we don't finish the bottle." As Alison drained her glass and held it out for a refill, the visitor checked the time. Half an hour ought to be long enough. Just 30 more minutes, and then the fun would start. Poor Alison. I don't think it's going to be much fun for her. If you do read the book, I hope you enjoy it very much. Thank you so much for watching.
And there we had, read by Marion, the start of what they knew. So just to give those that maybe haven't read it, just a quick idea of what it's about. It is, as they say, stroke of midnight in Hogmanay when Alison Reid admits a call at her home. She doesn't make it, and that's not a plot spoiler because it says it on the back of the book in terms of Alison, but it's reported to DI Claire Mackay and she goes to the scene. The initial evidence doesn't rule out murder, but it's not possible to say for certain. Yet when the pathologist informs Claire about a post-mortem of a young woman found in the Kinness burn and with similarities to Alison's case, it seems there's a strong chance that there's a killer on the loose in St Andrews. And we'll start with Jonathan this time.
Lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm not just saying that because Marion's on the front, provided a quote for the front cover of one of my books. I would be saying that anyway. Cards on the table. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Actually, I've enjoyed the kind of the 3 books that precede this. Yeah, this is the 4th, isn't it? This is the 4th in the series. I really enjoy Marion's writing style. That there's something there's something kind of quite clinical about it, but also very humane. And actually, that passage that she read there again, it's ruining all my notes. I was going to try and sound clever with all my notes. The bloody authors have gone in there. Bloody authors, eh? Yeah, the kind of that opening passage where that moment where the visitor slips something into the glass, totally chilling, completely chilling, and then it's followed up by brought in a bowl of pistachios along with some Bombay mix, and suddenly we're right back into this kind of normal. And this poor woman, something's going to happen, something terrible's going to happen, and you can see it coming in that. And I think that's something that Marion does very, very well. I should also say Marion is a McIlvenney debut nominee. So it's got kind of proper prestige. I thoroughly enjoy this. I'm not going to go into kind of harp on about too many kind of spoilers or details and things like that. But like I said, I love that kind of clinical, very, very technical approach that Marion takes to her writing. And it's with a lot of care, and it shows, it comes across, but it doesn't come across in a way that it's like a textbook. you know, or certainly not for me anyway. It doesn't feel like you know, you're reading a pathology textbook or anything like that. It's got that kind of that humanity about it as well, and this novel's no different.
Yep. Frankie?
This is the one where I'm slightly lukewarm, and I read the first of Marion's books, and so have a little kind of had a little knowledge of her writing style. I think she probably focuses a huge amount on research. I think there's quite a lot of sort of minutiae that I suspect, if I was to go and look it up, is absolutely bang on correct. It has that feel to it, and that's pretty interesting in itself. But then sometimes I think, I don't know, maybe it's a bit too much. For example, sort of naming all the streets that D.I. Claire Mackay is driving through. I don't know. I'm not a St Andrews person, as you can probably tell by my voice. Or actually, maybe that makes me a St Andrews person. That's for me. No. But no, I don't know St Andrews very well. I have been there a couple of times, but I don't know it very well. I kind of didn't. There was quite a lot of detail there that I didn't probably need. And I'm a bit, I guess it's a very comfortable read. So there are lots of really nice, interesting bits about it, but it was quite a comfortable read. I wasn't on the edge of my seat. I kind of figured things out sooner than I'd anticipated doing. But again, that's not always a bad thing. Some people really like that. And I'm a little bit worried, maybe it's the middle-aged woman in me. I guess I find that sort of the female protagonist in that way, I butt up against them a bit because I could be them, only older. And there are little sort of things that I kind of get frustrated with because I think it can make middle-aged women sound awfully similar to one another. There's a bit of it that's a little bit too kind of soap opera-ish in terms of the relationships, the sort of will she, won't she, who's she with now and who's she not with. And I'm trying really hard not to say those sorts of things because that's all really important to the character. And if you become a fan of the character, you don't want to know what's going on in her relationship. So I'm not going to give any spoilers there. But that seems to be a very important part of this series is D.I. Claire's relationships. And so we spend quite a lot of time on that, perhaps, rather than...
And Lou, I think it's fair, I'll ask you about it, but I think it's fair to say this is book 4. And we had some comments on Facebook that a lot of people like to read from book 1. And jumping in at book 4, I think Marion's done a reasonable job a good job actually, in terms of saying, I need to tell you some stuff that happened before. I don't want to tell you all, but I need to tell you enough. And that's, for me, the relationship. Plus, I've got to read this, Lou. Marjorie McCrory said, there's an upside to having that detail, Frankie. Yep, she had me Googling the brand of coat Claire was wearing. So yeah, there is an upside.
That's what I mean. So some of that detail was really great and really fascinating, and exactly going off and Googling is perfect. But maybe there's an awful lot of it. I don't need the street names.
And Lou, from your end?
This is, yeah, I'm kind of with Frankie, only more so. If you like this kind of thing, you'll love it. I have to say, it's not my kind of book. There's nothing wrong with it. It's solidly written. I found I was niggled by things that probably won't bother other people. Like Frankie, all the street names, but I didn't get a sense of St Andrews. Now, I know St Andrews quite well. Well, I was a student there a long time ago. So, okay, it's going to be different. But I had street names, but I didn't have a town. And I had a massive amount of relationship stuff to do with Claire Mackay, but I kind of didn't have a person. She had all this stuff, and all her personal life stuff is obviously quite complicated, and it had a bearing on both the plot and what happens to her personally off the job in this book, there was just a bit too much of it. I mean, I could have done with less. And it seems ridiculous saying this is book 4 and I need less information, but I kind of did need less, because you have an awful lot about this, and we have a lot about relationships and people. And I kind of was like, yeah, but I don't know these people. So, you know, I felt like I could have done with a run-up, and that's not to say it's bad. If you've read all the other 3, it's, you know, you're dying for this kind of information.
Yeah.
It's a really hard balance when you're writing a series, and there's a really hard balance, and nobody's ever going to be pleasing everybody in terms of here's all the stuff you need to know, and here's all the stuff that you would know if you're a new reader or if you're a series reader. And I don't think anybody ever is going to please every reader on that front. Yeah. And it's just, but just overall, it's fine. Just not my kind of book.
I think for me, I've got to own up here. I ended up writing a short story with the 4 debut winners last year for bloody Scotland. Marion was one of them. Marion, I'll tell you, Marion's the one that pulled me up very politely, but on a lot of the detail. She's good at it, she is. And I actually quite liked a lot of that in it, because at times I needed a break from the main story. That's what I felt it did. It's got that sort of roller coaster effect where you're in the story at the same time. But I think when it goes away from it, I think I read the first one. I haven't read 2 and 3, and I kind of see the arc. Yeah, and some books I think just benefit from that, because you need to have read book 1, 2, 3, 4. Someone's just commenting there, you know, very detailed police procedure on a sympathetic central character. It kind of flows. Picking it up cold, there were quite a few Facebook comments about the fact I needed to go back to 1. Yeah, and I don't know it's valid. The other thing I thought was interesting about it was, compared to the other 2 we read, there's a lot of tech in here. There's use. And actually, I think that, because we always, I don't know about yourself, but as authors, the complaint is it's easy to fix stuff if you've got a phone. You can look up more or less anything you want straight away. And therefore, authors spend years losing their phone or losing a signal or whatever it takes, yeah? Actually, Marion doesn't. She actually just incorporates that into the story and makes that part of the story, which, to be fair, is probably truer to life. That's truer now than it's ever been before.
We have tech. It's here. It's not going away. Police have to learn to deal with it, and therefore crime fiction has to learn to deal with it. You can either lose your phone, lose your signal, or whatever, or you can use it. Yeah. In terms, I like the way Marion does this, and I don't know how much research she's done into that side of things. I got a feeling with various things. I won't name anything. But there are various points which things are just kind of dropped in, or there's a paragraph. And it feels like she's done a massive amount of research, but knows how to boil it down to just the stuff that's relevant. But the tech, I think the tech was handled really well. Yeah. And, you know, it felt, I don't know how real it is. There's a kind of argument about it's got to be real or it's got to feel real. It certainly felt authentic to me.
I agree. The tech, she absolutely nailed. Absolutely nailed. And you see that so rarely. Yeah. You know, the fact that everybody was using it just like we would. And people were nervous of it just like we are. I thought that was, absolutely nailed it. And
Jonathan, just so to say here, Marion, I asked for some insight from Marion, and this kind of ties up the research and what she did. She said there is that scene where the character tips something into the glass of wine, and she says here, and a bowl of chili. But she actually needed to know if the so-called date rape drug, Rohypnol, could be detected in chili, right? So she went to the local pharmacist, queued up, got to the front, and asked them. Everybody in the shop stopped talking. I'm not surprised, yeah. And I'm not sure if they wanted to know the answer, if they just thought I was mad. Unfortunately, the pharmacist couldn't tell her.
Oh, no.
He said, incredibly, he'd never come across anyone asking that before. Really?
Never. Surely not. Surely not.
Surely it's an everyday thing.
That must happen all the time.
But that, you know, it's stuff like that. You know, I think that... I think when it comes to kind of tech, I think you guys have absolutely nailed it on the head. You know, it's very, very difficult to do and do well. And, you know, whether it's accurate or not, because I know I've certainly never queued up at the pharmacy to find out these types of things. You know, whether that is the case or it's not the case. I read this, as I've read all of our other books, and I was convinced that it was the case. And it's saying it with that authority, isn't it? It's having that authority and having the ability, more importantly, having the ability to write. Having the ability to write it and get it down to the bare bones, so that morons like me are able to understand it and get it and think that that's the case, and to stop me from going out to the pharmacies and asking these silly questions. Oh, excuse me, by the way, I've heard about this drug in this book. But yeah, I mean, listen, I am a fan. I am a fan of the series, and I appreciate what the guys are saying, that I think if you are a fan, you can't wait for the next in this series to come out, and that's what this is, and that's what's happened to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it in that capacity. And actually, do you know what? It is interesting hearing you know, people reading it who haven't read the kind of books in between, because that's the old debate, isn't it? It's the old debate for all writers, is that, you know, how do you keep that audience captured for 4 books or 5 books or 20 books or what have you? And how much of it do you put into how much do you start again essentially every time that you do it? So whoever can get that perfection, it's lightning in a ball.
You've just teed up the next book very nicely on that. Thank you for that.
5 are still in the post.
That's Marion Todd's What They Knew, and it's out just now. So the third book, we're going to hear a little bit from Val McDermid first, who's going to read a little bit from the third book, The Distant Echo, and then we'll chat about it. So let's hear from Val.
You find me here at the East Neuk of Fife, where The Distant Echo began all those years ago. I'm just going to read you a bit from the opening of the book. November 2003, St Andrews, Scotland. He always liked the cemetery at dawn. Not because daybreak offered any promise of a fresh beginning, but because it was too early for there to be anyone else around. Even in the dead of winter, when the pale light was so late in coming, he could guarantee solitude. No prying eyes to wonder who he was and why he was there, head bowed before that one particular grave. No nosy Parkers to question his right to be there. It had been a long and troublesome journey to reach this destination, but he was very good at uncovering information. Obsessive, some might say. He preferred persistent. He'd learned how to trawl official and unofficial sources, and eventually, after months of searching, he'd found the answers he'd been looking for. Unsatisfactory as they'd been, they had at least provided him with this marker. For some people, a grave represented an ending. Not for him. He saw it as a beginning, of sorts. He'd always known it wouldn't be sufficient in itself, so he'd waited, hoping for a sign to show him the way forward, and it had finally come. As the sky changed its colour from the outside to the inside of a mussel shell, he reached into his pocket and unfolded the clipping he'd taken from the local paper. Fife Police and Cold Cases Review. Unsolved murders in Fife going back as far as 30 years are to be re-examined in a full-scale cold case review, police announced this week. Chief Constable Sam Haig said that new forensic breakthroughs meant that cases which had lain dormant for many years could now be reopened with some hope of success. Old evidence which has lain in police property stores for decades will be the subject of such methods as DNA analysis to see whether fresh progress can be made. Assistant Chief Constable Crime James Lawson will head the review. He told the Courier, "Murder files are never closed. We owe it to the victims and their families to keep working the cases. In some instances we had a strong suspect at the time, though we didn't have enough evidence to tie them to the crime. But with modern forensic techniques, a single hair, a bloodstain or a trace of semen could give us all we need to obtain a conviction. There have been several recent instances in England of cases being successfully prosecuted after 20 years or more. A team of senior detectives will now make these cases their #1 priority." ACC Lawson was unwilling to reveal which specific cases will be top of the list for his detectives, but among them must surely be the tragic murder of local teenager Rosie Duff.
So that's from Val. I know from Val's point of view, I asked her earlier on, I'll give you some insight, but she deliberately waited till she got to Fife to record that. because she was elsewhere, so she said. But just to let those that haven't maybe read it, it's Distant Echo. It's The Blood from the Back, 4 in the morning, mid-December, and snow is smothering St Andrews. Student Alex Gilby and his 3 best friends are staggering home from a party when they stumble upon the body of a young woman. Rosie Duff has been raped, stabbed, and left for dead in the ancient Pictish cemetery, and the only suspects are the 4 young students stained with her blood. 25 years later, 5 police mount a cold case review. Among the unsolved murders they're examining is that of Rosie Duff. But someone else has their own idea of how justice should be done. So I'll start. I think, Frankie, I haven't started with you, have I?
No.
You knew it was coming.
Huge pressure taking on Val. Oh, she'll never speak to me again.
And she's on at the moment. She's on the.
Would be my luck. Gosh, this is going to be quite difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
Without saying anything that might ruin it for anybody. Well, not ruin it, but because there are a lot of twists and turns. There are red herrings. It's classic. There are red herrings. There's small town, there's rural, there's, it's all going on, and there are an awful lot of people. So if you struggle with keeping track of people, then you need to start reading this with a notebook in hand, because not only are there the people, but the people probably have more than one name because they have nicknames. So I don't know how she kept track as she was writing it. Gosh, there's so much to say. Right, so first of all, I'm going to start with, this is another book that has much of it in St Andrews. The majority of the book is based in Fife. I've already held my hand up to not being a St Andrews person, but this comes at it from a totally different perspective, although it's also snowing. There is a historical aspect to this book because it's set, the book itself is now,
2003, I think it is.
2003, yeah.
Okay, I couldn't remember. So nearly 20 years old. Then when you get to that, the first section of the book is set 25 years before that. So there is so it's set in the 70s, much of it. So you have to kind of take that, you have to be able to buy into that, which I think she does very well. The 4 students who are crucial to the whole book, I think are fascinating. And the way she looks at friendship, again, this is relationships, isn't it? The way she looks at friendship and its tensions is, it kind of keeps you going. And I don't know, but I started thinking about people I've known for a long time, and where would those breaks be in such a situation? Oh gosh, I'm finding it quite difficult to talk about this without giving anything away.
You're doing really well.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to be somebody who enjoys flipping a little bit in time. And I'm usually, I don't like that. I've said everything I don't like. It sounds like I don't like any books at all, which is blatantly not true. And anybody who has worked with me would know that that's not true. I think I like challenging the perceptions, I think, of what is a good book and what isn't a good book. But I think this is if you like Val, you're going to like this, but it's not gritty in the same way that some of the other series are. And I think you also need to approach this not thinking about the fact that there is a link to another series. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Trying not to give anything away.
Yeah, and Lou, I think it's fair to say, introduces Karen Perry. I mean, that's the loosest way, and it says that in the front cover. So it's not a Karen Perry book, but it does introduce. And I think what you've just said for me, Frankie, is that I loved it because it is two books that's you could almost say she could have stopped and there would have been one book and then there would have, I mean, that's what I loved about the fact was it was able to do that. What did you think, Louise?
Well, it's not going to come as any surprise for anybody who looks at my Twitter feeds to know that I'm a massive fan of Val McDermid. I have read this book. This is probably the fourth time I've read The Distant Echo. I hadn't read it in quite a few years. I remembered the plot because it's quite a memorable plot. Mm-hmm. When you get to the end and you're going, hang on a minute, yeah, it's memorable. But the thing that it still stands up for all the rereading that I have done of it and of quite a lot of Val's other books, the thing that makes me go back to them is not the plot. It's not the plot at all. I mean, it's great, but it's not the plot that makes you reread something. It's the characters. And they're just, in part, I was a student at St Andrews in the late 90s, which dates me quite badly. So I felt a kinship with these guys. I knew these guys, more or less. I had friends like these guys. And I know the tensions in St Andrews in terms of there's the town and then there's the university. And then in the university, there are people like what they call themselves the laddies for Kakori, which is, sorry, it sounds terrible in an English accent. But there are people like, there are a lot of Scots. And there are, when I was there were a lot of working class people. There were a lot of people from Northern Ireland. We kind of coalesced against what is more known about St Andrews. And we call them the Yars, the people in red trousers and rugby shirts who went to English public school. And oh, well, the joke is, of course, if you fail to get into Oxford or Cambridge, you can't at St Andrews. Huge amount of tension between those, very vividly put down on the page. I recognize the town because it's not about the streets. It's about the pubs and it's about where things are in relation to your favorite pub, your house. And here's the cathedral at the bottom of the road. And there's a lovely bit which takes place right on the cliffs. I know exactly where that is and I know what it feels like to be looking over the wall at that piece of sea. And so all of this it's just a huge treat for me to read it, frankly. And then, of course, there's the fact that these are great characters. And you get the divide between the two. You get to spend so much time with them. You see them as people. You see what finding Rosie's body has done to them. They're witnesses, but pretty much everybody thinks that they did it. They just got away with it. And it has a different impact on each one of them, and it has a massive impact on them as a foursome as well. And I think that's really important to sit there and read all of that. And also, you've sort of absorbed all of that by the time you get to the second part, 25 years later, which is where most of the action is. Really, there is one thing after another happens, shall we say. And it's very, very, it does feel like a different book, but it's it works beautifully. The more recent Karen Perry's are more interwoven between the past and the present. Sometimes it's flashbacks, sometimes it's just, a bit of the cold case, and then you get a bit of the new case. But I quite like the simplicity of this. It's just, I don't know, it kind of feels fresh because everybody is now weaving everything together and, you cliche of choice. So to go back and just go, right, we're going to have this bit of the plot and then we're going to have that bit of the plot and it's just going to follow on like that. It's actually quite nice. It's quite refreshing to go back.
And I think, Jonathan, I asked Val for a bit of insight on this, right? So I did the same thing. I asked Val, and it's interesting because you've just said it, Louise. She said the original idea, and she had to be reminded of this. She sent me a second email to say, I've just been told, I've just remembered. She said she was at a friend's party. Her son, a medical student, a couple of his pals were coming back, pissed from the pub one night, and stumbled on a fracas. Yeah, a group of youths were kicking the shit out of each other, who was on the ground, or kicking the shit out of a lad who was on the ground, crying and bleeding. But being nice middle-class lads, the students chased off the yobs, yeah, then went back to check on the guy on the ground. Which was when the cops arrived. They see three young men with blood in their hands, all sweaty, smelling of beer, and jump to the wrong conclusion. And before it got all out of hand, though, the victim actually told them, no, hang on, it wasn't them. But what I think's interesting, Jonathan, is she's taken that and then it's bad. She's twisted the end of that. That's it's not a giveaway, but the good thing is that for me, you think, oh God, if that happened, what would you do?
Yeah. Absolutely, and you're plunged straight into that, aren't you? That's the kind of formation of it. We talked earlier on about time. I beg your pardon. Time being almost a character within itself, and again, I was completely sucked in by the time element of it. We're taken back to the 70s. The dialogue, the behaviour of the police, it's not caricature. This is what it was like. It was the Wild West. Policing was the Wild West in these days. Now, I do hold my hands up and acknowledge that I was born in 1986. So what the hell do I know? But it's the truth. It's just part of the kind of popular zeitgeist that's what it was like, and it's portrayed so well. Particularly in the opening chapters, certainly, and exactly as you say, Gordon, that the actual the jumping off point for the plot. There's a wonderful bit where again, without kind of going into too much detail, a couple of characters are known to the police, and their files are pulled out, and it's got the official lines on it, what they've been done for and all the rest of it, and then when central character flips over the card, it's written in pencil what they're actually like. And I loved that. I loved how Val was able to, again, we're talking about condensing. Marion condenses all this fantastic technology and detail into something that we can understand. It was done so beautifully, where on one side it's all very much official, 6 months in 6 months behind bars, fine, all the rest of it, turn over the card, written in pencil, that could be rubbed out. Definitely an important part of it could be rubbed out. Has a bit of a temper, would be behind bars, won't be long before he's behind bars, and for a very long time. And I thought just the way that was written, the way that it was portrayed, the way that a tiny little moment in this overall investigation. And by that point, we're about, I can't remember exactly where we are in the story, but it's moved on so much. We've seen, exactly as the guys have said, talking about this kind of fractured relationship and what a massive event like this can do to people. I just loved that. I was there. I could smell the card. I could smell the office. I could smell the smoke. I could see the filing cabinet it come out of. And it's very, very special. I think it's very, very special when you come across a book and you read something by a wonderful writer. And I would be saying that whether she was here or not, obviously. But I think it's very special when you get that, and it evokes that sort of kind of emotional return in the reader. Yeah, really, really nice.
And I think the other thing for me is, it's no secret it's about revenge. It says it's about revenge. We won't plot spoil it. But one of the things that works for me very well is there's a whole bunch of characters you see later in life. So the revenge part, there's a very much the beginning of trying to figure where it's going, and then you see what they would have been. And for my money, what that allows me to do is and I think you said at the beginning, Frankie, it's like red herring and guessing game. It's knitted that way, and every time I thought I had it, I was completely wrong. Like I hate it. I always think, you're great if you're a reader. I figured that out, and I just kept, oh right, it's not that, and it was just one of those, and that's what kept me going. Was there was no way of knowing as I was going through it. I kept thinking the same thing over and over again. I've got it figured. No, I don't.
I had the same, and I did have it figured, but I thought that I hadn't. So I figured it, and then I thought I got it wrong. And I came up
because
with it.
You think it can't possibly be that.
A million. Well, no.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Well, I don't know.
That.
Yeah.
But I did think it could have been something else suddenly. Yeah. And then, and that's what she's so good at, is that throwing a slightly off kilter. Yeah. I mean, there were some bits that I wasn't so keen on, and I'm going to be very brave and say that there was some stereotyping that I really found challenging. But I think that, which I think was kind of unnecessary. But I think the fundamentals, I've also got to hold my hand up and say I had it on audiobook, because there was no way I was going to fit in all these books and every other book that's going on at the moment. and I was driving the length of the country. So I had it on audiobook, and I suspect that means that I have approached it in quite a different way from everybody else. Because, and that's why it was so nice hearing Val just read a bit, because actually she changed her accent for various characters in her reading. And of course, that's what was happening in the audiobook and was sending me round the twist. I mean, it was really doing my nutting. But so it was quite nice hearing her do that. But I do think it means that by default, you come at it in a slightly different, from a slightly different tack, probably.
Yeah. And I think I've got Rona McAdams written on Facebook. She said, agreed about the 70s being very well done. I was a student in the late 70s and it felt it was an accurate picture of working class Scottish student experience at the time. In fact, the bizarre thing is you're all talking about that. I was almost a student at that time. That shows you how old I am. My dad was police, and that was exactly what there was a Wild West element to the police, which comes across really, really well on that. And I think for me, that whole sense of time shift twice and again, because reading it now, given it was written as contemporary in 2003, it now reads like a story from back then. We were talking about tech earlier on. It misses that because there wasn't so much of it around. And that actually, so you end up with two big time jumps, which drew me in. That's what took me along the journey. And
yeah, I don't feel that it's some things are a little dated because you notice there is no tech, nobody has a phone, or things like that. But at the same time, because it doesn't deal with any of that, it still feels quite timeless. It feels quite fresh. I'm thinking back to reading Laidlaw, and I've read, what did I read recently? A Ted Lewis book, Plunder, which are written and set in the 70s, 60s and 70s. And they obviously aren't talking about mobile phones. They're talking about people going to Cobots to phone for someone. But there's a very small amount of that detail. And the rest of it is just, it's a beautifully written story. And I feel this is kind of similar to it as well. It's not avoiding things on purpose, but it's not interested in people making phone calls or anything like that. So it doesn't bother with them.
Yep.
It's an interesting.
Some people write in historical. Sorry, Jonathan.
No.
Some people write in historical fiction will deliberately put in they go to a call box, and it's just like, well, you don't actually need to say that.
Yeah.
You need to say it now and again, but you don't need to say it every chapter. So
I think it's interesting actually that considering that if you look at the context of the book being written in 2003 and we're talking about the kind of technology element of it, we've progressed so quickly in those nearly 20 years, and actually this is something that we might all come across in a lot of that fiction that's been written round about that time, that sort of kind of almost 20, you think about something that's written back in the 70s or the 80s or what have you, it's dated in the sense that you go into it knowing that it's written from a completely different era, but I find it mind-boggling to think that 2003 is a completely different era, but we've come on so far technology-wise, and in turn that's had such a massive effect on our day-to-day lives that already there is that there's that sort of historical piece, that period piece to it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, interesting.
We could talk all night on this. We've already run over time, so there'll be people shouting at us because MasterChef is on TV or whatever it happens to be. It'll be something we missed. So that was Val McDermid's The Distant Echo. Yep. So before I'll thank everybody in a minute, but what I want to do is hopefully Lynn Anderson's there just to tell us what the books are for next month's book group. So I'm just hoping the technology works and Lynn appears like magic on the screen.
Oh, here I am. Hi there. Thank you. Really enjoyed that. That was really interesting. Okay, next month we have our three books are The Last Resort, Susie Holiday, The Long Drop, Denise Mina, and our debut, City of Vengeance, D.V. Bishop. And David was a Pitch Perfect winner at Bloody Scotland. So it's a wonderful collection of long-term writers, winners and debuts. We will have with us to discuss the books Claire Mitchell QC. You may know her from Podcast of Witches of Scotland. Noel Holton, author, also a spotlighter at Bloody Scotland and an established blogger. And Thomas Vyse, an avid reader of crime fiction. So that will be on the 26th of May, and we'll look forward to talking to you then. That's
great, Lynn. Thanks very much. And if I'd just like to say to Frankie, to Louise and Jonathan, thank you for making it so easy for me for me to do this. It was really insightful to hear all the views, and I hope everybody watching got the same from it. If you can continue the conversation on Facebook. That's the whole point of a book club, and if you want to post going forward. But for us, that's this month's book club over. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to everybody that's been watching us, and we'll see you next month.